great-great-grandfather, Christian Hans Monsen, joined the church in Norway. His story is quite well known. There's a fictionalized account which was printed in the church magazines. This one is from the New Era back in 1978. I'd like to share some of that one. So this, since it's a fictionalized account, I'll read some of the account here and then I'll just ad-lib until we get to the good part. The pale yellow light from the lantern Christian Monsen carried through dark, dancing shadows against the gray stone walls of the Fredrikstad, Norway prison. Christian hesitated at the heavy oak door that led from the prison office to the cells below. His head was racing. He knew that if his plan to release the two prisoners was discovered, he would also be made a prisoner here. Christian felt the cold smoothness of the jailer's keys, and he felt the weight of irrevocable decision. He drew a long, deep breath, inserted the key in the lock, and turned it. There was the clicking sound of metal. With his free hand, he pulled the door open. The air from the cells was dank and fetid, the stench of unwashed men and stale cellar air. Quietly, Christian walked down the stone steps to the long rows of cells that the warden of the prison had placed in his care as a night guard. At the bottom of the steps, he stopped and hung the lantern on the hook that protruded from the wall. The light fell bright on his face. It revealed a tall, 14-year-old Norwegian boy with bright sky blue eyes and straight, tawny-colored hair. His face was smooth and fair, and normally full of laughter and mischief, but in the flickering lantern and light, it was firm and serious. Christian walked across the floor to the cell on the far left, inserted the key into the lock, and opened the door. "Elders," his voice was soft. The opening door flooded a pool of light onto the floor of the dark cell. The cell was small with no windows, no openings for air or light except the small barred opening of the door Christian had opened. In the corner of the room was a moldy pile of straw that the prisoners slept on. There were dark areas on the walls covered with a green slime where water seeped in. The air was cold and musty and stained, a smell that twisted Christian's stomach even after a year of working in the prison. Light fell on two villainous-looking men who were standing near the door and waiting. Both wore shaggy beards and long, dark hair with grease and dirt. Their faces were sallow and pocked with small, red sores. Their clothes were filthy and tattered, rotting in the damp air. In the year he had worked in the prison, Christian had seen many men who looked like these two. Filthy, rotting men with cold, empty eyes that followed him with hate. But these two were different. Their clothes, their hair, and their skin looked the same as any of the men who had spent several months in the prison. But it was the eyes where Christian had noticed a difference. The eyes of these two were warm and alive and strong. Elder Hansen smiled and grasped Christian's shoulder with a powerful hand. "Father in heaven is pleased with your courage, Christian," he said. "We had better hurry." The other man, Elder Nelson, said, stepping out of the cell, "But let's pray first." These were two of the LDS missionaries who were imprisoned in Norway because as the church started proselyting in Norway, they had success. They had baptized several hundred of the Norwegians, and the Lutheran Church went to the government and asked for the LDS elders to be jailed. And so Christian was a 14-year-old boy who was an apprentice jail keeper, and he had been taught the gospel through the bars of these two elders, Elder Hansen and Elder Nelson, and he had made the decision to be baptized. So this is the account of him going to unlock the jail cell during the night, and he unlocked the jail cell so that these two elders could take him down to the fjord and baptize him, which he did. He was baptized in the middle of the night in the fjord in Norway at 14 years old.
All right, if you are interested in the tug of war, the Homestead one is challenging any other one to a tug of war, and the tug of war will take place over by the train station. Also, please don't forget, if you're thirsty, there's tons of water over there in the pavilion. So, the tug of war will begin in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
He was baptized. The elders were asking what his parents would think because he was doing this on his own. He didn't know. He thought his father would be really angry, which he was, and his mother would be more understanding, which she was. But he relied on a statement. He relied on a statement from his own grandmother, his own grandfather. He said, "My grandfather told me that there are steps in life that could change my future and the future of entire generations. He told me I should take those steps carefully in a direction I believe to be right, no matter how difficult they appear to be. I know this is right." He was also at that time up for his Lutheran catechism, and he had kept it quiet that he had been baptized by the elders. And so he stood up in the Lutheran church and went through the series of questions. What do you believe about God? What do you believe about the parts and passions of God? And all those kind of questions in the catechism. And he answered the questions according to his new beliefs as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which set the priest and the congregation on fire, and his own father. And his father stormed out of the church, and when they got home, Christian's father was furious, and Christian was in charge of chopping all the wood for the wood stove and the fireplace. And his father took every one of those pieces of wood and threw them at him and beat him with his cane. And he was out in the barn, and his mother came out to him.
Ages 10 to 17, the watermelon eating contest is open.
Why? Why did he do this? And he explained to his mother that he knew it was right. The beating was really severe. In the actual family journals that we have, it was said that he could have died very easily from the beating he took. Just in the sake of interest, it's more interesting than me telling it, but he was disowned by his family, he was disowned by his father, and so in the wintertime he was wandering around near Oslo, Drammen, Fredrikstad, Norway, in the cold, in the snow, and his mother gave him a few little provisions in a handkerchief, but he was out of food, and he was starving, and he had nowhere to go, and so he was out on the outskirts of town, and he knelt down underneath a snowy bush. He found a little area underneath the bush, and he knelt and prayed to Father in heaven to know what he should do. And he felt the impression to go to a house just right down the street, down the road, and so he did. And there was a lady there named Mrs. Kobetven, and she said that her husband wasn't home, but to come back when her husband wasn't there. But she gave him some food to eat, so he didn't starve. And he was still disconsolate after many days of wandering, or weeks of wandering. And so he knelt down again because he was really at the end of his hope. And as he was kneeling again in the snow that had just fallen, unbeknownst to him, the man of the house passed by while he was praying again and heard his prayer. And he asked young Christian what's wrong, and anyway, the long story is they took him in. It just so happened that he ended up just down the road from newly converted members of the church. Some of the few hundred members of the church, he just happened to be right there. And they took him in. They didn't have any children, so they treated him like a son. And Mr. Holtvetten was a carpenter and woodworker, so they taught him the trade, and he learned that. When he was 19, Christian decided to come to America. And when he came to America, he ended up being quite a tradesman, tremendous woodworker, and he and his team, his crews, were responsible for all of the big spiral staircases and all the woodwork in the original grand four temples of the church: Salt Lake, Manti, Logan, and St. George. He is the one who did all of that. His team were the ones who did all that fantastic woodwork. And he went through a lot of suffering in life. He was jailed for polygamy in Utah. But the best part, if you'll bear with me here, many years later, Christian's son Otto was called on a mission back to Norway. And here we go. Otto was called as one of the assistants to the Norway mission president. He was in Oslo, and he had been called to go and teach the most wealthy man in Oslo. The wealthiest man in Oslo had inquired at the mission home to know more about the church. And so Otto Monson was sent to teach the man. And he takes off on foot in Oslo to go visit this wealthy man up on the hill. And he had his route planned, and as he was walking, he decided it was going to take too long. So he said, not wanting to be late, he turned off the main road and cut through a maze of narrow back streets. The streets were tortuous, twisting through the poorer part of the city. The area was known for its high crime rate, and Otto, dressed in a clean pressed suit and a white shirt, felt uneasy walking alone there. A short distance from the mansion he came to a lone row of rotting chicken coop houses. It was a rule in the mission that missionaries were to speak Norwegian, but it had been over a year since Otto had heard a word of spoken English. He was passing close to one of the small chicken coop houses when he heard a commanding voice in English. Go into that house, it demanded. Otto stopped. He looked around. There was no one inside. The streets were vacant. Why go in there, he thought. He seriously doubted if anyone could live in that rotting shack. The cow sheds back home were more fit to live in than that. Looking around, he continued walking. As he walked, the voice, now small but strong, repeated the command, go into that house. I have another appointment, he thought. Besides, what in that rotting pile of rags and filth could be more important than an appointment with the wealthiest man in Oslo, an educated man, a man of importance, a man of influence? Go into that house, the voice repeated. Otto could see the gate of the mansion when he stopped and turned back. I must be crazy, he thought. I'll bet no one even lives there. He knocked on the door of the shack. From inside the building, he heard the sound of shuffling feet and the creak of boards. His skin shivered. The door swung inward on leather hinges, and the sallow face of an old woman appeared. She looked as old as time itself, he thought. She smelled of sickness and old age, and he knew from her appearance that she was near death. But she looked up and smiled at him a little painfully. He could sense a terrible loneliness in her, a loneliness that pricked his conscience so deeply and painfully that he wanted to turn and run, to get away from her sight, from the warm brown eyes. Yes, she said. Her voice was weak but pleasant sounding. Otto wondered what he should say or do. I'm from America, he said. It was all he could think of. I once knew a boy who went to America, she said. What was his name? Otto asked politely, wondering what he was doing here when he was late for another appointment, an important appointment. He wanted to tell her he had made a mistake, that he had knocked on the wrong door. His name, she said, with a warm, faraway look in her eye, was Christian Monson. But that was a long time ago, nearly 50 years. Otto felt a burning, humbling excitement flood unexpectedly over his body at the sound of the name. Breathless, he asked what her name was. It couldn't be, he thought, not after all these years. I'm Mrs. Hotbit, then, she answered. Otto felt an indescribable pleasure deep inside, and he felt warm tears on his cheeks. I'm Otto Monson. Christian Monson is my father, and I know you well, Anne Holtbitbein. Very well. The street was quiet. It seemed to Otto that time stood still. Then suddenly he felt the bony arms of the old woman embrace him, heard her crying softly, and felt a terrible loneliness leave her. Later, Otto learned from her that not long after Christian left for America, the Hotbitbeins moved from Drammen to Oslo. The letters Christian sent from America never found them. 5 years after the move, Moen Hotbitbein became ill and died. Since then, his wife had been alone, and for the last few years, she had been sick and unable to earn a living. There was no one to help. She says she had been afraid and she felt she would die alone and had prayed for help. Otto visited the old woman often, saw that she was cared for, arranged for her to have a good house to live in, good food and medicine. Several months later she died, but she didn't die alone or without love. That's my great-great-great-grandfather. Thank you.